Okay, so we have the record button on.
Scary.
There are dire warnings that New South Wales will be hit by increasingly extreme weather.
2015 was the hottest year since climate records began.
Figures show this July was the single hottest month in recorded history.
Australia sweltered through its hottest spring on record.
Climate change is now affecting every country on every continent.
It's the rate that's of great concern.
And what do you put that rate down to?
Oh, it's human activity.
We have everything we need. Some still doubt that we have the will to act, but I say the will to act is itself a renewable resource.
Hello, welcome listeners. I'm Gresham, host with the Climactic Collective, and in conversation this episode with Paul Shelton, partner, father of two and Transition Town enthusiast. I met Paul this year when we started working for the same organisation, not in the area of climate change, but we soon discovered our mutual passion. In fact, since recording this interview, I have discovered just how accomplished Paul is. He is the Director of Growing Spaces, member of the founding committee of Transition Australia, and was President of Transition Darebin in Melbourne for 4 years. He is the winner of Darebin Sustainability Awards Local Hero in 2016 and winner of Australia's Most Edible Street, which I presume we can also thank his amazing wife for. If you are anything like me and often feel the dread about our future, then this episode offers a complimentary dose of perspective that doesn't discount the reality of climate change, but one that also considers the possibilities for growth and meaning. This year, Paul organised a national convergence for Transition Towns Australia, attracting 120 locals and 50 people around Australia. In this episode, he demystifies transition towns, which to me, if I'm honest, had always thought they were some kind of special place, somewhere out bush, generally unattainable for, dare I say, an average city family like mine. Yet transition towns are a balance of an inspiring vision with a very here and now proactive focus. And it's this powerful blend of self-determination with community connections that I believe is fostering transformational community resilience. So wherever you are, thank you so much for listening in, for caring deeply with us, and soak up the joyful energy of this episode.
So welcome, Paul, to Climactic. How are you going today?
I'm very well. The sun is shining.
It is.
Wind is blowing. Things are good at this point.
Fantastic. We recently got together talking about a conference that you coordinated called Networks to Action, and that prompted much learning from me about transition towns. And I wondered if we could maybe begin there to share with the audience, what is Transition Towns?
For sure. So Transition Towns started in the UK, and it actually came out of permaculture. It was sort of like a community application of permaculture principles. So all those things like, circular economies, closed loops, moving from systems to details, observing, interacting, all those sort of core permaculture principles applied to a community. And basically the idea is that you're trying to apply those to build an interdependent and resilient community that will be able to deal with global problems through local solutions. And I guess one of the sort of the really exciting things about that is that it's framed around a positive vision. So it's around what could we do to actually go ahead of the curve, the changes we know we need to make to prepare ourselves for what life might be like when things happen, as we kind of know they're going to.
Yeah, and that really struck me when you said what appeals to you is that it's building a positive vision. And could you speak a little more about that appeal?
Yeah, for sure. So this is, I think, a long-running debate in the environment and sustainability sort of community about how do you actually drive change. I think there are two sides, and one side of that is that you have to be like really, really blatant and almost sort of scare people into taking urgent action. I think that's completely valid. The other side of it, I guess, is that idea that you need to present a positive, motivating view of what could be to drive people to make the same level changes, but to do it with a view to trying to get to that the life that we want. And that's always, I guess, appealed to me because I think, it's quite motivating, but also that idea that our lives actually could be better, that we're not stuck in having to be forced to live a life that we are, that we could actually determine through our own actions, our own decisions, our own purchases, our own interactions, what sort of society and what culture we want to have. So that's been, I think, quite appealing.
So it could be that the word positive is more that it's acknowledging that there's a huge problem out there. So it's more like it's a synthesis of the fear matched with a vision of having something to look and move towards that is something where we can actually live as opposed to where we're all going to be struggling.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has the answer as to which one works better. I think what we really need to know is to how do we have multiple approaches to driving change. And I think one of those is about that sort of acknowledgement of the reality, but realization that what can sometimes drive people is a positive vision of what could be. And I guess that's been something that I've always engaged with. The idea that if you actually stop and look a little bit at the way that we deal with our sort of community, our environment and our interactions with each other, how much we work, how much we buy, how much we waste, that we could actually fairly easily acknowledge that we could live a more productive, more resilient, more fruitful, more interdependent, more rewarding existence if we made some decisions to stop doing certain things and to start doing other things.
And are there examples of transition towns already within Victoria or Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Transition Towns movement is an international movement. It's based in the UK. That's where it came out of. But there are hundreds of transition towns spread across the world. In Australia, we have, I think at last count, we were sort of 70, 80 transition town groups spread across Australia in all states and in all different areas, some urban, some regional, some rural. And some of them have been sort of active for, now going 10, 15 years or so. So there are lots and lots of examples, and they do a whole range of things. We have groups who are really heavily invested in energy and retrofitting of houses, of food swaps, of different approaches to waste management, different approaches to food, even groups who are interested in education and transport. And the range of things they do is fairly huge. I think the linkage and the similarity between these groups is that they're looking for localised solutions to global problems. And that's what I think drives that localised, resilient approaches to dealing with massive challenges.
And so how did you get into it? How did you first learn about transition towns?
So I guess a fairly gradual sort of discovery of different things. And I think my mother was quite environmentally active, so I've always been sort of around this space. When I came back from travelling overseas, I think I discovered this idea of the Transition Towns Network, and the idea of framing how we can deal with our. The idea is that they have a concept of addiction to growth and to waste and to energy, and I think that really made me sort of go, oh yeah, that makes absolute sense. We are addicted to purchasing, to wasting, to having stuff, and I think that solidified sort of my angle and energised me with a desire to do some more stuff. And I just returned from overseas, so I then had that sense of community and that real desire to be localised and to really engage with the human scale of solutions. So I joined my local transition group, Transition Darebin, and was involved heavily in that for. It's now been sort of 6 or 7 years, I guess. So
was it a process of you returning back here and looking online and openly just trying to discover what was out there, or had you heard of transition towns before? Did you know someone in the area? This is just making me feel old now because I can't actually recall. It was such a long time ago. You can just make something up. I just make it up, yeah. I think I'm trying to think of how I first actually found them. I think I just responded to something that I saw on a wall or in a post of some sort. And just went along to that. There's in the area that I guess we chose to live in, which was an intentional decision, actually based on how far we could ride our bicycles to our place of employment. There's a lot of things going on.
So we got involved in a whole bunch of those, and I guess I just found that the Transition Towns group was a group that really teed up and sort of fitted with my sort of energy for that time at the moment.
Yep. And prior to Transition Towns and living overseas, and even before living overseas, you said that your mum was quite environmentally aware and engaged, and that's the kind of the background of how you grew up. And also your appeal to the kind of more vision and having a positive, kind of a very active and engaged solution. Have there been other times where you've been taking action around climate change or engagement in environmental sustainable issues where you had a different approach, or?
Yeah, so I remember going to the what was it called, the East Gippsland Coalition, and where we were sort of fighting against and protesting against the logging of some old growth forest. I remember that in the very beginnings of high school, so that was a very long time ago.
Wow.
And I think I've always been aware of those things. For example, I also remember sort of doing studies about retrofitting and energy efficient housing when I was in primary school, actually. So I've always had this interest, and I think part of that has been my mum's sort of activity in that space, but part of it has also been the fact that I have two very, very intelligent brothers who are always up for a sort of vigorous and rigorous debate.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of really encouraged me to think and to have to defend my position. And one of those positions, I guess, has always been this sort of disconnect of what sort of life do we actually want to live, and having to really objectively look at that and evaluate and assess, well, where is this?
I cannot believe how deep that is for if you're in high school, that you're thinking about these things, and it's making me think of the kids now in the school strike thinking very deeply about life and existential matters.
Yeah.
And something that you were doing, I'm going to say way back then, at the risk of,
30 years ago.
But how engaged you were already in high school. Were there particular emotions, or like a kind of like, that's not fair, or like an anger that you felt back then around the way that the world was working? Or
I don't think it was an emotionally driven thing. I think it was like a logical disconnect. Like, it was that idea that how can we think that we can continue to do more, do faster, consume more, earn more, buy more, waste more? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. So I think I've always had that sort of like, this just doesn't work. And I love systems thinking. I love that sort of, how does this all fit in together into a coherent way? And if you acknowledge that we are on a finite planet, you just simply can't accept that we are going to continue expanding forever. That's just not possible. So I think it's been that sort of, it's almost technical thinking rather than emotional thinking.
Yep.
But certainly, I guess maybe it's fair to say that there's always been that sense of we can do better.
Yep.
I remember that the house that I designed, my first energy efficient house, was this sort of beautifully submerged sort of underground thing, and had water on the windows, and I was imagining me looking up at the wind turbine that was generating electricity, and it was completely impractical. But at the time, it was a beautiful sort of vision of like, wow, how that could be. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. And did you ever find getting stuck in the culture or the business as usual, and the mentality around what we're told we need to feel happy and satisfied, like purchasing and? Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I every year I have this issue with Christmas, where you get that sort of. On one side, this is about family and love and forgiveness and joy, and on the other side, it's about how much you can buy and how much you can get. I've always found that really difficult. I guess in that day, 30 years ago or so, it wasn't a sort of thing that we had consciously and overted yet. I think now very much it is. And I have this conversation with my children all the time, when they'll go, oh, yeah, I'd really like that, but I don't really need it. My son currently is writing a letter to Lego to ask them how they're going with a recycled approach, or a sort of more environmentally friendly approach to Lego, because he loves Lego, but he's actually, you can see him sort of having this conflict of, well, it's plastic. So I love the Lego, but how can I justify that? I think the kids now are so much more on the ball than we were.
And just tell the audience, how old is he?
He is 10.
Wow.
And I have an 8-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. And they're all, it's fascinating to watch their little thought processes go.
Yeah. But I guess it's one way to support that in a conflict or tension is transferring that into some kind of action. And an action that's not saying, hey, I'm the one to blame or you're the one to blame, but let's be accountable and responsible and ask some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And get curious
and do something about it.
Test the system.
Yeah.
And how lucky is he to be able to do that? It's amazing.
Well, I hope so. I don't think it doesn't come scot-free. I think there are the pitfalls in having to do that. And in some ways, maybe we'd love to think that we'd have this sort of just blissfully ignorant childhood, but I don't think that's reality. And I actually think he and she, are both better off from having that awareness and having the toolkit of being able to process some of that stuff. And I love the moments where they manage to find the win-win out of that. When we say, let's go out, but let's take our Tupperware, so we can sit in the park. I love those sort of moments where you just go, that's gold, fantastic, let's do that.
And the more challenging moments, thinking of people in our audience or also parents who have children who are grappling with the systems changes that are occurring, some that are stuck and some that are in transition, and how they kind of tend to the sadness or the frustration or the anxiety that they might be seeing in their children. I don't expect you to obviously have all the answers, but I'm interested in how you, as a dad with, you've got such a wealth of experience and knowledge around this subject. How do you kind of approach it with your kids when they do have that inner battle or they do feel a bit sad?
For sure, and I completely agree. I do not have all the answers, and I don't think anybody has the answers at this point. And I guess the way I approach it is that you can pretend that they aren't aware, but that's really just you pretending that the anxiety doesn't come from what we do. The anxiety comes from a reality and a sort of a real acknowledgement of what's going on in their world. And we can pretend that it's not the case, but that doesn't change the fact that they are going to pick it up. So what I guess my approach is to say that we should really sort of give them the benefit of the doubt that they get what's going on. We should engage them as much as we can in understanding and have that conversation. One of the amazing things that my wife does, of many amazing things, is really early on our sort of decision to have children, we said that we weren't going to lie to our children at all, which makes, again, Christmas somewhat awkward at times. But when they
what do you mean?
Nothing.
Is there some kind of secret there that you need to reveal on
I don't
air?
think there's definitely not a secret that I need to reveal on air.
I'm going to tell
fantastic.
Santa that.
Look, tell him hi from me, or her hi from me. Who am I to say who Santa is and isn't? But we had those conversations, and we were perfectly honest, and we actually talked about some of the background. But I think that we've always said that we're going to be honest with them. So when they ask a question, we actually give them the honest answer. Not to say we try and avoid shoulding them, telling them what they should do and what they shouldn't do, but we try and be completely honest about what's going on and involve them in, so what should we do about it? So when, my daughter's sort of talking about, the environment and forests and stuff, then we say, well, okay, so how do we avoid this? How do we promote this? How can we plant some bee trees so that we can promote insect life? How can we grow some more of our own food? Any of those sorts of things. And I think we've always tried to do that because kids, if you can give the kids some sort of a vehicle and some sort of a leverage and some sort of a tool or a way of thinking about things that actually enables them to think, oh, okay, I get this is a problem. How do we think about the solution? As opposed to just holding this sort of generalized, I know that something's wrong, but I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to have the resources to actually make it sort of, I don't know the word, but the instruments in which to deal and process with. Yeah. I remember going to a talk years ago of a guy who was asked, how do you teach resilience in children? And he said, you can't. All you can do is you can give them the tools and the awarenesses and the knowledge so that when they are down, they can choose to use those tools to get themselves back up, and then they will make themselves resilient.
I can even just imagine having a conversation or trying to have a dialogue with one's child about this and just generating words on the experience is a protective factor in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you were talking, something came to mind that I think is probably a more challenging subject, which is when things aren't going as quickly or as effectively as we would like, and we do allow those thoughts around what is to come enter, and the catastrophe that we're facing and the existential crisis that we're facing. How do you as a dad sit with or work through? I assume you have these moments. I have these moments. I feel like since having children, especially, much more motivated, and I feel the fear and the urgency. It's more palpable. And so how are you finding yourself working through that at the moment? How are you going with that?
Well, I'd love to say it's easy. I've pretty much got it sorted, but I don't
have it sorted,
I don't have it. Yes, sorry. I did say I didn't have the answers. I did point that out in the disclaimer. Look, I don't know. I think, what are your choices? Like, do you throw your hands up and go, I don't know, so I'm just going to ignore and hope for the best? I don't really think that's an option. Once you know, you can't unknow something. I think the only thing you can do is say, if we were to shoot forward 50 years, you want to be able to say in 50 years' time, I did my absolute best. I really authentically put into to whatever sort of changes we're making. And that I did my best to try and make it good.
And could that include, like, I've got to be honest, sometimes I have thrown my hands up in the air and, deleted emails before even reading them, turned off the news, tried to ignore that climate change is even happening, just to try to have a day where I don't have those thoughts enter in. Do you think that what I'm telling myself to make myself feel better is that that's actually part of the process of doing my best?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think you don't do yourself or anyone else any favours if you are overwhelmed. I'm the same. And I get constant alerts through my emails, and most of them I don't read. And the news, I skip over most of the things. I acknowledge the scope of the problem that we're doing. I'm well aware of all the tragedy. I don't need to be traumatised constantly by it.
That's the choice.
That's the choice. And the emergency services thing, if the first person to ensure that you are safe and you are able to act is you. And I think that's the same with responding to this climate emergency, that we really need to make sure that we're in a place to help other people. We don't do anyone any favours if we're curled up in a ball.
Yep.
Though, having curled up in a ball several times, it's find a nice place to curl up in a ball, and it's quite nice to for 10 minutes to curl up in a ball and just rock yourself gently to sleep. But I think that's just looking after yourself. I don't think that's sort of ignoring.
Yeah, it's almost part of the journey is having those moments of meltdown in order to then get that through the system to then but the key is choosing to refocus on something, on what works and what's driving you and motivating you.
Yeah. I mean, it's like any sort of change, isn't it? And I think that sort of looping back to that sort of Transition Towns thing, that idea of addiction, that we are addicted to growth, then gives us a sort of a well-travelled path of how we deal with that addiction. We acknowledge the addiction. We acknowledge it's going to be tough to kick it. We know we're going to need help. We know there are going to be times when it's going to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and we need to work at it. And I think that's actually kind of a nice way of thinking about it.
Yeah, it's an excellent model to be working off. It actually reminds me of the Good Grief Network stuff that's happening in the US, and they are modelling it off the addiction model in terms of peer-to-peer and acknowledging the problem is the first step, and so on. So.
Now it's time for Climactic Community Corner, where we play voice messages sent to us on Facebook. We're opening up this space for the community to share events, news, thoughts, feelings, all sorts. If you've got a message to share, just send it to us at Climactic Show on Facebook, or hello@climactic.fm.
Hi there, Climactic listeners. Ben McKenzie here from Splendid Chaps Productions. We make Night Terrace, a sci-fi comedy audio series starring Jackie Woodburn, also known as Susan from Neighbours. Here's a clip where her character, Dr. Anastasia Black, has been taken into the future by her time-travelling terrace house.
What exactly was our solution to the country becoming an unlivable wasteland?
We couldn't just sit there and watch our country die. So we built a big spaceship and buggered off. You are standing on the Starship Australis.
Remember, surfing in the Harold Holt crawling tanks is strictly prohibited. Please enjoy your time on board the Starship Australis. Get a dog up you.
I hope you enjoyed that little taste of Night Terrace. We're currently trying to crowdfund a third season. Find out how you can help and listen to our first episode for free at nightterrace.com. That's terrace as in terrace house.
On Thursday, the 28th of November, at 12 p.m., environment groups and communities from across Victoria will peacefully rally together at Parliament to call for urgent action for our natural world. After 5 years of the Andrews government, nature deserves more, especially in the face of climate change. Victorians need new and better funded national parks, stronger nature laws, better protections for our threatened forests, rivers, beaches, oceans, and native plants and animals. We need real action for our natural places and wildlife. Now, join in the Nature for Life rally. Bring a sign to highlight the natural places you love that deserve better protection. See you on Parliament steps, Thursday, 28th of November at 12 p.m. Look for Nature for Life rally on Facebook and visit vnpa.org.au/rally for more information, and you'll find a link in the show notes. My thanks to the organizers for the Nature for Life rally for sending in this message for Community Corner. And if you've got a message, please just send it in to hello@climactic.fm.
One of the things that you told me before was that you could have more fun with less. Now, I know this is true, but I keep falling into the trap of having these thoughts, I need this and I need that. And I catch myself and then I don't buy this and that most of the time. Yep. Sometimes I slip. Yep. But how do you stay firm to that? Like you do know that you can have more fun with less. Like absolutely. We all know this deep in our bones. Yeah. How do we kind of get people to, do this?
Well, there's probably two parts to that question, as with all good responses. The first is not to beat yourself up if you slip, because that actually doesn't help that much. But I think I think one of the troubles that we have, and I have this, I've had this debate with loads of people, is that we're in such a hurry. We actually put ourselves in situations where we don't have the wherewithal to stop ourselves and go, oh, hang on. Let's not do that. Years ago, again, we decided we weren't going to work full time. We started off having sort of 1 year out, 1 year on, but between my wife, to myself and my wife, to look after our children, and then we actually decided we would work part time, both of us part time. Ideally, 3 days a week. We've both slipped a little bit, but I think one of the things that actually helps you staying on that bandwagon is giving yourself enough time to actually do it. Mm-hmm. The doing more and enjoying life more with less is actually sort of founded on having the time to make use of, to sort of avoid those spontaneous things. Just to give you an example, and I know we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but when you go shopping, if you are working full time and you are under the pump, you go straight to the convenience store, you go to Coles, or you go to a mass supermarket. Won't start advertising for them. And you're forced to buy things that are packaged. You're forced to buy things that are probably less healthy than you would. Whereas if you actually had the time to think about what you're going to get, you would buy things that were less packaged, more healthy, that were more sort of actually enlivening to your soul. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that kills you inside more than something you stick into a microwave and it comes out looking much the same as it did when you stuck it in.
Except popcorn.
Even so, popcorn in microwaves. Geez, we're really going to have another talk about that. But I mean, all of those sorts of things, if you can actually decrease the amount of tensions and pressures you have on your life by working less, by owning less, by moving around less. This idea that we can be on three sides of a town in one day is just nuts. And in fact, if we slow down a little bit, you would find that we can actually give ourselves time to go, do I really need that? A great example is takeaway coffees. How many millions of takeaway coffees do we have? And are they actually making us really, really unhappy? Because we're so rushing around to get our coffee and quickly rush to the next thing. It would be way better for us just to say, okay, if you want a coffee, great. Stop. Take the 10 minutes. Your life is not that important to take 10 minutes.
Or
just
it is
to
that important to take 10 minutes.
It is that important.
Yeah.
You are that important. Your
Yeah.
job, your next appointment, whatever,
Yeah.
is probably not
Yeah.
important enough that you can't actually prioritise 10
Yeah.
minutes just to sit.
So, devil's advocate question. How,
Tough.
with the Transition Town philosophy, mentality, practically speaking, if we're on, commercial air, speaking to, the large majority of the Australian population who, from what we can observe, are very time poor, highly, working a lot of hours just to pay the mortgage. How do you see the Transition Towns philosophy blending in with kind of business as usual, like the majority of people's lives?
Yeah, that is a really tough question.
It's a devil's... Well, yeah.
Oh, no. You're asking the really tough questions. So I guess... And it's good that you brought up the mortgage, because actually the mortgage thing is a real challenge for people, because it actually sticks you in that space where you have to do these things to pay this thing, and it then drives the rest of your life to a certain extent. So how does the...
But so does rent.
Well,
Rents,
so property in
mortgage.
general, like that single amount that you have to work huge amounts in order to pay this inflated amount of prices that really has no bearing on the cost that it takes, the cost of construction or what have you. So how does it integrate? I guess what it does is encourages you to think about what are the lever points in your life that you could actually become more interdependent, less independent. You could become slower. You could become more sort of localized in your responses. Some things like that is, can you even look at how do I access my food, or if I grow lettuces on my balcony, can I swap them with somebody else to get something else? Can I think about walking or riding as opposed to those sorts of things, as opposed to driving? Can I think about how do I engage with my next door neighbours? I mean, in a really simple way, every single person should know their next door neighbours.
I know, it's crazy that,
it's nuts.
It's only taken I feel like even, 2-3 decades ago, knowing your neighbours and playing with your neighbours was just part of the norm.
Yeah.
But these days, you barely speak to even people in the same apartment block, let alone.
Right. Yeah. And all of the sort of the flow-on effect of that is that you start to you tell your kids, you can't just go play at the park by yourself because I don't know who might be there. And that's, all of these things, we start to get scared of other. Yep. But I will take that sort of question that actually it's a real, it's a reality that we do need to be careful that when we're talking about movements, and Transition Towns being one of them, that we say that there are people who are doing it really tough and that we shouldn't sort of preach to this is how one must live. That some people are really having to work really hard to make ends meet.
But I think the principles are very accessible. Yeah. One of my worries is the Transition Towns get stigmatised as hippie, not that there's anything wrong with hippies, but that it kind of fits only one particular type of community or person. Sure. Whereas when you actually read about Transition Towns and permaculture, you realise that they're common humanity elements.
Absolutely. That idea of being interconnected is just such an important thing that we've just lost, and so many aspects of our our economy, even of our architectural design, tall fences of our roads and transport systems are designed. Even the way that we move through, we've all got headphones on now. Nobody will stop and talk to people. A lot of these things we've done to ourselves, but what the impact of it is that they are individualizing us, and that's a real problem. That really damages our ability to be resilient. And you are not going to be resilient if you are an independent person.
Yeah, and to miss out on those connected... I was walking to the train station this morning and this train commuter smiled at me. Not once, but twice. Yeah. Like I walked past her, I went and got a coffee, walked back. She smiled at me twice. She looked me in the eyes and smiled at me. And it was kind of like both awkward and warming.
Yeah.
And you miss out on those opportunities when you're looking at your phone.
Oh, absolutely.
So I want to think about this interconnection piece, but also the challenges of applying Transition Town philosophy even within the Transition Town movement, and just thinking about some of the challenges that you've come up against in your volunteer work with Transition Towns. And, you've said right in the beginning there's no one solution here.
No, I really firmly believe that we don't know what's going to work. That simple problems have simple answers. Complex problems must have complex and multiple answers. And, whatever, if I choose to go one way, but actually it turns out that another group is the answer, then I will be the first to buy them a round of beers and say, yeah, you were right. So some of I guess for me, the problem or one of the challenges around transition towns is being real about it. And I think this is one of the things that we need to look at across the sort of environmental sustainability community is how do we match the level of problem with the level of solution? We're facing a real existential challenge that are, massive losses and traumatize listeners as much as we like, but let's not. So how do we actually up what transition towns can do to the point where we can actually say, you know what, we are way more resilient. I think one of the things that Transition Towns has been great at doing is building community. One of the things that I think is a challenge to Transition Towns is how do we up the systems that we put in place to make them truly resilient. So if there was a food shock, that your local food network, your veggie swaps, your food swaps actually are going to be instrumental in helping you deal with that better. Your local permaculture group is going to be ready to swing into action to increase the sort of the homegrown urban orchard sort of stuff. How do we do those things that make us truly resilient? There's part of the transition sort of, I guess, history is to look at what happened in Cuba when there was a complete oil embargo, and some of the systems that swung into action to actually build community and enable them to actually get healthier through that reduction in energy. And I know it's been a little sort of romanticized, and I'm sure we don't have the full story of it. But things like, sharing networks, things like knowing your community, things like having alternative transports, and then really going to, do we have community gardens that are actually urban orchards that will produce food, really produce, not commercial level, but commercial sort of quantities of food for their local area. If they stopped collecting our rubbish, could we actually deal with that in a way that was sort of meeting the need? And I think this is the challenge in thinking around localised solutions, is how do we up it to the point where it
buffer it against the potential kind of stresses and strains on that mini system.
That's right. Because the last thing you want to do is have a system that works really well when everything's good. But then when things are bad,
it falls apart.
Yeah,
let's not have that.
Let's not have that. So I think that there needs to be a sort of just a really honest, and I think across the board, we all need to step back and look at our organisations and look at what we're doing and say, okay, what do we do well? Let's do that. Let's do a lot more of that. And what do we not do so well? And if we don't do this, can we find a group who does do that well?
Yeah, and it's, I guess, being conscious of the psychological mentality that can be so damaging around competition. And, we are in many respects competing for different things, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that there's always going to be our ego in the room. And, how can we really embody in our own great turning, this, the spirit of rising together, not above.
Absolutely.
And I think that's challenged for all of us on a daily basis, even if we are quite conscious of collaborating and bringing everyone with us, that there's still, going to be moments where there is that kind of inner competitive spirit or, that dichotomous right-wrong and passion around what's right or what's wrong. And we're all trying to shift to that more complex picture where dichotomies are synthesized, where there's kind of multiple truths.
Yeah. And I think that we've really had no model of that. Like throughout my entire life, there's only been one way that things are done. It's a commercial sort of neo-capitalist way. You have a boss, you have people who do things. The aim is to expand, it's to get bigger, it's to take over more, it's to be more important, more. And I think we really at a deep level struggle to think of how that could be different.
Yep.
Despite the fact that in a natural world, actually out-and-out competition is really rare. Mutualism and is by far the sort of preferred approach. But I just don't think we really have the models, or even it's not close enough to our own experience in a sort of temporal way for us to be able to go, okay, this would look like that. A lot of the groups are sort of harking back to sort of World War responses. This is how we looked after each other. Again, I think that's probably been romanticised a little bit as to how well we actually did that.
Yeah, but it's kind of like taking a little bit of the past, but also a little bit of the visionary future, and synthesising them for the present.
Yep, and I think that idea of the old, elder wisdom with future vision, is definitely it's definitely a powerful combo.
I am going to suggest, we were going to talk about the convergence that you organised, where there was 56 different organisations coming together.
Indeed.
And perhaps in our show notes we can put a link to the Transitions Australia website, so people can learn a little bit more about that.
For sure.
I really, before our time comes to an end, would love to hear about any words of wisdoms or lessons that you had from organising such a big event, because I know there are many listeners out there who are trying to gather people together, gather groups together, organise conferences, symposiums, this and that, and just wondering if you have any lessons that you learned from, organising the convergence recently.
So yes, lots of lessons. Every time I organise one of these things, I sometimes stop myself about week sort of 6 or so and go, "What am I doing? Why am I doing this again?" In terms of sort of words of wisdom, I think you need to be really open and communicative with people, but also have a real clear vision of what you want to achieve. One of the things that I think leaves people enjoying the day but leaving with not much is when you sort of just, when the aim is just to get together. I think we really need to have a sort of a real clear message of what do we want to get. So we framed ours around networks for action, and that in a nutshell was what we wanted. We wanted to develop those networks to really drive action. We didn't want it to be a nice, warm, fuzzy time. That's good.
Yep.
That meets
That's a nice tone.
That's a nice tone, but if we can actually make that get to some place, then that's great. I think I think it's really difficult to get different groups together into the same space, but I also think it's really crucial. I did my facilitator training with a group called GroupWorks, and they always talked about the world needing good facilitators to enable the wisdom in the room or the wisdom in the world to come to the surface. And I really think that's really true. The world really does need opportunities to have real, frank, challenging but compassionate conversations. We really need to have those more. In terms of sort of, I guess, bringing all these people together, we thought a lot about how could we frame this in a way that would promote people to come in with that, okay, this is what it's going to be. So we made it really clear about the sort of the way that we structured things. So we said things prior to people getting there about, nobody has the answer. So we really wanted to straight away sort of say, okay, this is not an opportunity for you to recruit or for you to preach. That simple solutions have simple answers, and this ain't it. So nobody has the answer. So we're going to be open to hearing all the answers.
Yeah. So setting that really clear expectation from the beginning.
From the beginning, absolutely. We put as a sort of guiding principle the idea of challenge with compassion. That we really wanted it not to be stuck in that. I can't remember exactly how it's said, but stuck in that space of nice, where we're all going to be very nice to each other. We really wanted people to be saying, "Yeah, but what about this? How would you deal with this? How would you expand a change or market, get people involved?"
It's kind of like the balance in therapy between like validating, like, okay, I get where you're coming from. It makes sense that you're feeling that way. But if you only validate, you never get anywhere. You have to have problem solving and encouragement and motivating.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so we really wanted, and if that's done in a space of compassion, then everybody leaves going, wow, that was really tough. But you know what? I actually feel better.
It's very satisfying.
It's great. Yep. And again, in community groups, we don't have a lot of opportunities to do that. And then I think we made just really clear about what the outcome was. And so we talked about powerful, visible and interdependent action. And that's what we wanted to have out of that, to give people that sort of mental vision of what that might be. In terms of challenges, there are always challenges getting together different groups. But what I think was lovely about actually being in the space, and I said it at the time, that you could catch glimpses where you would go, oh my God, I've just seen something amazing. I've just seen these three groups who don't really see eye to eye suddenly just almost, pausing for a second going, oh, hey.
Common ground?
Common ground.
Oh,
actually, we're actually, yeah, I agree with that. That's great.
Wow.
And, that just sort of, you can see it in facilitation all the time where the energy just sort of either goes up or just goes, whew. Everyone's like, oh, great.
Yeah.
I guess we don't need to compete anymore.
Oh.
And it was amazing to see some of those just glimpses of, wow, this is where our power actually gets, gets massive.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, it was also great to see people go from a space of sort of hard challenge to wanton silliness.
Yeah.
We had a hookup. We had 120 people in Melbourne, but we also hooked up with 5 other states. So we had sort of around maybe 200 odd people across Australia. And what we really wanted to do was to try and hook them up through a multimedia platform so they could feel the reality of, actually there are millions of volunteers, there are millions of people who are spending hours and hours and hours donating to ways that we can sort of help the environment or change the world that we want to live in. So we tried to do that in an online thing. We learned some lessons, some things were good. Technology is always problematic.
Yep.
But one of the things we did was say it can't all be about content. It has to be about community at some point. So in between these sort of rapid reporting from each of the states, we had challenges. And some of them were sort of, like mindful breathing. We sort of played some music and in for 5 and out for 7 and all that sort of thing. And some of them were just out and out silly. So we had a confronting the hug apocalypse session where you had to, with consent of course, give your next door neighbour a hug. Or a fist bump or a compliment, and it was great to see that on the screen. And we also had a what do we call it? A sustainer boogie, which was 30 seconds of dancing. And whilst it was silly, it was kind of amazing to see the 120 people in the room dancing to Shake a Tail Feather, but also for them to see people in Queensland, people in South Australia, people in Tasmania, people in New South Wales, people in Western Australia, all being in different places but at the same time doing the same thing.
Yep.
You could almost suspend your disbelief for a second and go, hey, we're all in the same room.
Yeah.
And I think that was amazing.
Yeah. And just in recalling this now, you're like absolutely glowing opposite me. You're very animated. And I feel like that is so important. I guess I want to say congratulations on organising. Just soak in the compliment.
Oh.
Congratulations for being such an awesome human being. For pulling together so many people from such diverse groups to a common cause. And reveling in the achievements and the accomplishments of that, because this is what sustains our motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just so nice. I mean, that energy to see people, at the right time, having the right strategy or practice with the right tone, with the right people, that's when the magic happens. And that's, I mean, to sort of loop all the way back to living life more with less.
Yeah.
Imagine if that was your Friday night.
Yeah.
That in your community you could have that right time. You don't need a fancy venue. It can be a park. It can be whatever. You don't actually need very much. If we had more of that and less of the consumption, actually our lives would be so much better.
Yeah, so living life with more.
Living life with more.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
I love it. And I love your creative facilitation style. I think there's so much to learn with all of the different strategies and techniques that you made to help that convergence work and function as optimally as possible. Yeah. We need to finish up our time here together and we can keep chatting after this without it being recorded. But thank you so much for being so honest and giving in your time today and for sharing such relevant stories about, how you got into this, the challenges that you face that I'm sure the audience will really connect with as shared challenges. And if the audience wanted to learn a little bit more about Transition Towns or you, where would they go?
I think that's pretty much all I have to learn. There's nothing more about me. I'm not actually that interesting.
Just good.
So what I would encourage people to do is to go to the Transition Australia website. It has a free way that they can advertise events, that they can advertise groups. It's really, really easy to navigate. What we would really like to do is for that website to show not our events, but to show just the size and the scope of events that are happening everywhere. If we really looked at how many groups and how many actions there are happening across Australia and put them in a space where they were easily visible, I think people would just be like, whoa, there is so much happening, and it would just dwarf the Minerals Council, which is always on the news or that sort of thing. You just go, wow, there are 50 groups within a kilometre of my thing, and there are 60 things happening this Saturday alone.
We really need to see that and soak it in to realise
absolutely.
there is stuff happening. And, of course, there's more to be done and there's lots of stuff happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's massively motivating. So go to www.transitionaustralia.net.
Amazing. We'll put it in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
With a link. Thanks, Paul.
No worries. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. You've been listening to Climactic, the flagship podcast of the Climactic Collective, a podcast network dedicated to lifting the voices of the climate community. You can find out more about the people behind Climactic and all the shows we produce at climactic.fm. We are a social enterprise podcast network, and we greatly appreciate your support. You can find a link to our Pozible where you can support us directly in the show notes of this episode or from our website. Thank you for listening, and from the whole Climactic Collective, keep up the great work and take care of each other in these climactic times.
The Climactic Collective.